Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live stream and Q&A. Hopefully, you're all having a great Tuesday. Thanks so much for joining us this week as we get in to the latest Star Wars news, as well as your guys' questions, comments, theories, anything you'd like to discuss in the chat. Make sure you're sending over your chats in the chat room. We do go first come, first serve usually, but we also have a bunch of ways to bypass that. If you send in a super chat, you're guaranteed on tonight's show. If you join our Patreon and YouTube membership programs at the $5 tier or higher, you get priority chat access, and that is $5 per month. So you get basically what a super chat could give you, but for the entire month for $5. So check out that tier, as well as a variety of other tiers. Maybe a lower tier is right for you, and you would like to support the channel that way. Check out that content. But again, keep firing in those chats because we try to incorporate as many as possible into the discussion of the night. So obviously the big story tonight, we're talking about the Mandalorian and Grogu trailer, kind of surprise drop last week. If you joined us last week, or I mean actually yesterday, excuse me, but if you joined us last week, you heard us talk about where is this trailer. This was before any of the news came out that it's ready to go and they just haven't posted it yet. We talked about where is this trailer. They've posted 2 stills from Starfighter, which is currently in production but doesn't come out for almost 2 years. Where's the trailer for Mandalorian and Grogu? Where's any type of promotion whatsoever for Mandalorian and Grogu? And yesterday, they gave us just that. We got our first teaser trailer. They're calling it a trailer. It's most undoubtedly a teaser trailer. And we also got a very cool new stylish poster with a change in Mandalorian and Grogu logo. So we're going to talk about all of that, as well as some of the Easter eggs and stuff we saw throughout the trailer. We want to hear your guys' thoughts on the trailer. It seems to have been kind of a divisive trailer from people online. Some people have really enjoyed it, other people not so much. So let us know which side of the fence you're on with Mandalorian and Grogu in the chat. If you're talking about something specifically related to the chat, then we can bring your conversation into the chat that we're having currently about the Mandalorian and Grogu. We have a few other topics we can get to, time permitting, some smaller scale Star Wars stories that have been kind of sprinkling out into the world of Star Wars the last few weeks. But of course, the Mandalorian and Grogu is our most prevalent thing to talk about. Make sure you hit the like button if you haven't. More people are watching right now than have liked the stream, and that really helps our channel out to hit that like button. And also subscribe if you're new. We do this every Tuesday. You can come, you can ask your questions, anything you'd like to discuss with us. This is your chance to get to talk with us, get to know us a little better, and us to get to know you guys, our audience. And we really enjoy always having conversations with you all. All right, let's get into the Mandalorian and Grogu. The Mandalorian and Grogu dropped their first trailer yesterday outside of the teasers that have kind of all been leaked from D23 and from Star Wars Celebration 2025. We got our first trailer for the film officially released, and they did incorporate, like I said a little bit earlier, a logo change, which is a lot more stylistic. I kind of likened it into our reaction. And again, if you want to see our first, reaction to seeing the trailer for the first time, that video went up yesterday. You can check that out on the channel. I kind of likened it to like a postcard, and the poster, especially, it has a lot of postcard vibes. I love that it's all hand drawn. That's something that's really, really cool. Missing from today's Star Wars marketing that we used to get all the time in every Star Wars project through the prequels, right? We had hand-drawn art, and so this looks very much hand-drawn, even if it is, some of it does look maybe traced, because it's a very realistic looking versions of the characters, and also shots we've seen exactly from other, promotion, but still very cool. I really like this poster, and it has kind of that, to me, that like kind of Southern California postcard style font with underneath the Mandalorian and Grogu, the only in theaters, that type of thing, that kind of cursive mix with basic, English font. It looks good. I like that. It definitely has the like Western color vibes as well to the poster. So really cool piece of marketing all around. I think the thing that's seemed to be the most divisive amongst the community on this is just that, especially the trailer, but this poster as well. Both of these are the types of things that feel very teaserish, like almost an announcement kind of trailer, an announcement poster. This poster especially really reminds me of the one that we got in 2022 for the Bad Batch season 2. It was kind of just a stylish variation, something that they weren't necessarily going to release as the main movie poster, but something that they released for fans to kind of look at and enjoy and speculate on as a piece of art. So you combine that with the trailer, which is very much so almost completely nonverbal, a lot of shots of the characters just doing things. I liked it because it got you back in the vibes of The Mandalorian. It got you back into what the world feels like. Got me excited for more adventures with the Mandalorian. There are a handful of shots that just look staged a little bit nicer, look like they have that kind of cinematic elevation to them. But I think one thing that was missing that was in those other D23 and celebration trailers is just that kind of statement shot, right? That statement moment that's like, this is why it should be on the big screen. This is a big screen project and product, not necessarily Mandalorian season 4, but in theaters. And so I can understand why people are a little disappointed with some of the marketing around here. I would just caution people that yes, we are just getting started, and hopefully we get a lot more. Last week, Sonic and I kind of speculated around Avatar being maybe the place they would initially launch. Maybe that will be the next phase of marketing for Mandalorian and Grogu, considering this will be the next huge temple for live action Disney filmmaking after Avatar comes out. But Sonic, after having a day kind of to reflect on the trailer and the poster and what we've seen from the new kind of first start of the marketing push for Mandalorian and Grogu, what are your thoughts on all of it now, about a day removed from our initial reaction?
Yeah, I mean, it's just nice that it came out because the timing, obviously, everything going on with Kimmel and the FCC, that obviously delayed it by a week. And now that it's out, it's like, great, okay. Like, this is something that needed to come with a bit more of a bang. I can understand that. There's obviously the people who don't care about the situation. They're like, I just want a good Star Wars trailer. And they're like, yeah, it doesn't really feel like like a very teasery cinematic trailer. Like, it feels like a almost like a TV spot in a lot of ways, especially because the focus is so heavy on Yoda, Baby Yoda, and the Anzellans. Like, not so much about Din Djarin, not so much about like what it's the big focus of the mission. Like when we see the celebration trailer, you're like, oh, here's this Imperial Shadow Council hunting down mission that season 3 ends on, and now we're seeing it like in progress. And the rumors of this film have been like the beginning sequence, whole hallway fight and everything deals with like one of these Shadow Council members being kind of knocked out because of what Din and Grogu get to achieve. It seems like we get a couple extra shots of that, but it's not the focus. Now we're suddenly seeing a lot of like the Hut stuff that everyone's like, why is Jeremy Allen White signing up for this of all actors for a CGI Hut role, right? And that to like a muscular gladiatorian style version. And it's because, well, hey, we're not just taking the Clone Wars version of that character, but we're actually tying him into the legacy of his father now that he is no longer the major domo, now that he's gone. Now I have to deal with these twin Huts that we introduced way back in 2022 and have these Hut enforcer droids and all that. So that stuff is forgotten for a lot of people. I will say that. I think when you look at Book of Boba Fett, you're like, oh, yeah, that was 2022. That was mostly Mando 2.5. So those are things that like are not the most exciting things to me. For me, it's exciting because I'm like, okay, they're not forgetting these things and they're actually doing some pretty interesting stuff there. And that's what I wish Book of Boba Fett had kind of leaned more towards Boba versus these Huts are looming in the background, setting up Cad Bane and everything for a possible season 2. It doesn't really seem like there is plans for season 2. So maybe this is a way to streamline it, incorporate it, make Book of Boba Fett be a chapter of Mandalorian season 4. And now that it's a movie, it's kind of becoming the secondary plot that leads us to this next big step in the Imperial plot or something. I like all that stuff, but does it really work in this trailer to even convey that necessarily? No, because again, we still haven't seen Rada. We still haven't seen much action besides like the classic Din fighting some random monster and all that. So I totally get that feeling for people who are just like, this is kind of a bland trailer. I do get that. I think it has a lot of lore implications and everything that get me excited, but if it's not from season 3 or if it's not even from stuff that was, like, hinted at in the Celebration trailer that was both action, but, like, also, like, "Hey, like, this is more recent," I think people would've been a little bit more like, "Whoa," and if we got that trailer, right, I think that would've gotten people way more hyped up. Obviously, it's not super cinematic in the same way as the first one was. That first one that got leaked, the hallway sequence and all that, that to me screams like, "Hey, this is where the budget is getting elevated up. This is still a mid-budget Star Wars film, but it's not gonna be anything too shabby." Here, a lot of the shots that we got are almost entirely CGI or super puppetry, or here's this old, base that we saw with all the rebels and or the New Republic pilots in season 3. So it's not necessarily anything super new. And the one new exciting shot that could have been like fully played out was all the AT&T stuff, ATT stuff, and it just didn't come out for a lot of people. So I fully understand that. I wish that they'd called this a teaser trailer instead of just saying trailer on the title. That also gets people's expectations raised up.
Hmm.
This is always gonna be a essentially a TV movie. It's a conversion, just like how Moana 2 was a Moana TV show, just how Lilo& Stitch was a Disney Plus movie, gets bumped up to theaters, probably gets a little extra work. It's what's happening here with this film. It just happens to be that they have a lot more time on this one. There's they took a lot more time in just focusing on making sure the script was right. We didn't hear anything about any major reshoots. It didn't seem like the volume production style had to be fully disrupted or anything. So, yeah, my hope is like, all right, it's not the most exciting thing right now, but at least it's like a nice pin drop. Like, okay, here, you guys have been asking for something. Here we go. Is it gonna necessarily get full positivity online after the last thing we saw being Andor season 2 and how cinematic that is, how much of a budget they really threw into that? No, not really. All right. And this is where like a lot of that Andor season 2 sentiment, these Andor elitists I've seen online are being like, oh, we're going back to the toy box. But this was the thing that got us all excited back in 2019 and 2020, right? It's not so far removed that we can just dismiss it all. We just need to give it a little bit more proper refocusing. That's what it seems like it's happening here. We're not like Marvel where they had to take a huge step back and be like, let's reevaluate everything. Let's change an entire Avengers film. This is more of them being like, okay, we've made something so cinematic, but that's a TV show, and that's just not profitable in the same way as putting it in the movie theater. So why not take the most recognizable characters post sequels, put them to a movie level audience, right? They do that, they tease at Thrawn, stuff like that. I'm sure the next couple trailers will be way more cinematic. I'm not gonna even be worried about it. I think this is just something that is, almost like the urgency was coming with like, "Hey, this is like a huge gap between Andor season 2 and if at best, Maul Shadow Lord possibly coming out, but maybe not even that. Maybe it might just be Mandalorian Grogu, which is a huge, huge, almost year-long gap here."
Well, I think a lot of this is kind of just like we talked about last week. It's a lot of let's just let people know this exists. I mean, because if you're not in the Star Wars space, it's hard to know this movie's coming out. They've only shown stuff at conventions, which has not been, officially released to the public. The only official posters that have been released was some concept art that was released, what, a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. And the title, which is now even different than the title they're using now. So there hasn't been any marketing at all for this unless you're plugged into the Star Wars space. And I would say even a lot of the stuff that came from Celebration, because yes, there are not necessarily leaked pictures, but like secondhand pictures where they showed stuff at Celebration and they allowed people press to take pictures of it and post it on their Twitter accounts, but they never released the like official versions of those set photos and those stills. So like there's been no marketing at all for this movie, and I think this is just the hey, this is coming out marketing. I personally would have done this back in May when everybody was talking about it, or in April when everybody was talking about Celebration, when Mandalorian and Grogu was kind of the darling of Celebration 2025. It did show the most footage. It did have the most like actors from the film there. It did show the most stills. They did have a bunch of panels at the convention talking about the film. This movie was everywhere if you were at Celebration. But if you weren't, especially, on this side of the world where we were getting the information, 16-hour difference between where it's coming in Japan, a lot of that didn't spread around the United States in like pop culture circles because there was no trailer, no centerpiece to talk about that was released to everybody to see. So unless you were actively seeking it out on YouTube when it was up for 5 minutes or on Twitter, you weren't going to find this. And so this is a project that I don't think they can expect people to actively search out. They're going to have to convince people to watch this. And I'm not saying that purely for any reason on the quality. It's because the show, or this was a show and people expect it to be a show. And so you have to convince people not only to go into the theaters to see it, but also what's the point of this movie? Do I need to have seen, like Jerome asks in the comments, do I need to have seen the other seasons? What do you recommend to catch up? That's always the big barrier, right? Is homework. You want less homework for your projects. Marvel's had a really hard time with this with different projects, and you've seen a lot of their different projects that they've based on TV show tie-ins, Disney Plus tie-ins have fallen flat in theaters. The Marvels is their worst performing movie. You have Captain America, the new Captain America, even though the name Captain America is on there. How Sam Wilson becomes Captain America is all in a TV show. So if you didn't watch that, you don't know what's happening. There are so many things that they've done to tie into their TV shows that haven't worked. I think The Mandalorian could be the first one that actually works because it's an episodic TV show. It's something that's built on the next adventure, right? It's something that can continue to perpetuate over and over and over again. But they have to show people that this is actually a movie, and people, for whatever it says about society, people aren't going to read the fine print. They're not going to look at in theaters May 22nd on the title card. They're not going to stay until the very end and see in theaters in May 2026. Like people are going to just ignore that and just see Mandalorian and be like, oh yeah, TV show. You have to convince people this is a theatrical experience. So I really love what they did yesterday because I miss the art of the teaser. I miss the art of a teaser poster and a teaser trailer. I miss all of that. We don't do that for film marketing anymore. But I think all this should have come out in May or April and really set this up. So then when we got to October, when we got to 8 months away from the movie, you could release a full trailer that actually does have the cinematic shots, that does have all of the stuff that you're expecting to see in a cinematically elevated Mandalorian. And instead, we're probably going to be waiting until December, maybe even later to get all of that. And by then, is it too late to market this movie? I don't know. I mean, you never know. With social media, you never know. Like, if something catches fire, it will do well, even if it's in the month leading up to the movie, right? But if it's going off of traditional movie marketing, I think this is kind of a weird strategy, especially for something that I don't know if it sells as well as they think it sells. It sells to Star Wars fans, right? Us Star Wars fans are expecting this. We know it's coming out. We just want to see little glimpses of it. But does it sell to the average Joe, to the person who heard of the Mandalorian but doesn't know anything about it? I don't know if this necessarily does. So let us know what you guys think in the comments. And to answer your question, Jerome, I would recommend watching the 3 seasons of the show and the Book of Boba Fett. So I think those 4 things should be fine to catch up for the film. And I really do expect this film to kind of not really include anything from the show outside of winks and references. I don't think you're going to have seen it to watch this because they've made that mistake already so many times with Marvel to where, like, if you want to know who a character is or how things changed for that character, you have to have seen the show. And even if they kind of gloss over it plot wise, you're going to be a little lost if you never watched it. I think with this, they're going to basically restart completely with this concept. And from the synopsis they dropped yesterday as well with the poster. I mean, it's as simple a synopsis as you can possibly get. It's the evil empire has fallen, and the Imperial warlords remain scattered throughout the galaxy. As the fledgling New Republic works to protect everything the rebellion fought for, they have enlisted the help of legendary Mandalorian bounty hunter Din Djarin and his apprentice Grogu. mean, that could basically be the synopsis for season one. So
Yeah.
they're not they're not really relying on heavy amounts of previous knowledge for this movie.
Yeah, I guess to answer both your question, Liam, about the marketing and what Jerome is saying, I do agree. For Jerome's question, right? Like, yes, you pretty much should watch Mandalorian seasons 1 through 3, and definitely Book of Boba Fett because of how hut heavy it seems. That's something that was teased at the very beginning of Book of Boba Fett. Obviously, if you don't know, Boba takes over after Jabba's killed in Return of the Jedi with this show, right? There's a couple extra things there. I don't really want to spoil that, but it starts off fairly interesting politically, and then it just kind of loses that focus, and you're wondering why those two Hut characters that you see on the poster, like, or even in that show, like it's literally a trace, I believe, from their one appearance in the Book of Boba Fett. So for them to be on the poster, I'm like, okay, yeah, they're definitely streamlining some stuff that was actually more potent storytelling wise and actually bringing it hopefully means that Boba Fett also shows up. We've talked about this in our trailer reaction yesterday, like that his story with the Huts actually gets to be played out. Presumably, with a full season 4, he probably gets a lot more scenes here. I hope it's not them just cutting them out and then just slapping it on a Din Djarin, and at least let him have an interesting perspective on what's going on. Maybe have his own front that we're not seeing what's going on per se, but he at least gets to have a cool action sequence and then give some exposition like almost every episode of The Mandalorian, especially season 1 and season 2. Like, oh, I can help you with this, but first you have to help me with that, right? If we can kind of do something like this in this vein, especially with the fact that we see Rada the Hut, the big hut that's in that big arena, hopefully Boba Fett at least has one cool scene or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, I do agree with Liam. Still watch seasons 1 to 3 of Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett. Book of Boba Fett is one that people definitely missed because there are like crucial episodes of the Mandalorian in there. That's why we call it Mandalorian season 2.5 in a lot of ways, because it kind of undercuts the whole character of Boba Fett and everything, unfortunately. But yeah, do you need to watch them? No. And again, this is a show that's episodic. Once you get the vibe of the characters and you just get like a YouTube recap or something, you'll pretty much be caught up. Only really season 3 is dealing with like all these like more serialized plot points. And I think that could have worked. It's just that some of the arrangement of it was pretty bad. Should have had Book of Boba Fett's Mando 2.5 episodes be included in season 3, right? You could have really like fleshed out the beginning portion of that. Then you could have, and that could have just been, you know, everything with the pirates in season 3, and then starting off with them. Then we get into more of the Mandalore stuff, and then Grogu gets to be tied into there. I still say cut out a lot of episode 6, even if it plays out mostly the same way. Put way more focus on the end of that episode. If you've seen that episode, you know what I mean. It's just way too silly, and for especially that good of a director and Bryce Dallas Howard to have really handled there. And then you could still do the last 2 episodes as they were, and you would have had a much stronger season that was serialized. But now you can't. Now it is what it is, and it seems like again they're queuing in a lot of stuff from season 3 being set in stone. Like that still happened. You just don't have to deal with it. But yeah, you can just jump in. I expect this to be like a movie that starts off with a quick recap of like the essentials of both these two lead characters, but you don't need to know the events. And this is the nice thing about a show like this, where even when there was like a season of serialization, it doesn't necessarily take away from the average audience's remembrance of like 2019, 2020, when we're all at home and streaming was at its peak and you can really go watch a movie. So you're like, yeah, I watched The Mandalorian. Like it's a cool 40 minutes of my day this week. Right. So it'll be harkening more on those vibes. So if you don't get to catch up on all that stuff, I would say even just Mando season 1, season 2, that's good enough, frankly. That might be more than necessary. You might just even need a season 1 with just how the log line is for this film. So yeah, that's how I would present that. If you guys want us to, it could be definitely cool to do like a rewatch leading up week after week of all the episodes of Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett until the movie starts. That could be a good way for new audiences and old audiences to rediscover the show and everything. And leading into the movie, I think that'd be a pretty fun way. So let us know in the comments or on the replay. Let us know if that's something you might be interested in. And as far as the marketing question that you brought up, Liam, it's weird because I feel like they're still marketing this as like a TV season, right? Like we know that a lot of the shows besides like Acolyte in recent memory, it's almost been like 3 weeks before the show comes out. Bam, here we just have to start
Yeah.
pumping it out. Little Instagram reels, like TV spots, stuff like that. Luckily, we're starting a little earlier here. It's not a full like season of trailers and TV spots that we'd expect for a major return for Star Wars to the silver screen. So that is throwing me off that this would be the opening, but it works as a teaser. It gives you a little taste of the vibes. I will give it that. Even if I don't love everything about execution of it, I do agree with what you're saying. It does feel like we are teasing a lot. I do hope they lean more into the organic viral marketing of like attaching it for like, oh, this is an exclusive trailer for a week in theaters, like the Odyssey trailer was, and we see it with the Avatar Fire and Ash movie, right? Like that's a great way for corporate synergy. Not to be all supportive of that or anything, but that's probably the best way to do it. Like attach it to Tron, like maybe a different variation. Maybe take the Celebration trailer, like how we saw the season 3 Mandalorian trailer at Celebration. It eventually did get released in a modified form as like its second or third trailer. Right? You can do something like that. Maybe that's where you get that full hallway sequence that we saw from the leak trailer in December, and then you can start building up the story, building up these little things. Honestly, I think it'd be cool for like them to almost do like a DC sort of way with their trailers where they can show it like a character or some sequence and then they end like with these are like the comics this was inspired by, right? Instead of that, just be like these are like the storylines that this was from season 2 of Mandalorian. Like just throw little clips of like these different seasons of the show too. And I think that's a good way to get people caught up without necessarily having to rewatch everything. Just get them in the flow of like, oh, I remember that, or I remember seeing a little bit of this. Do that as some TV spots. Do whatever is the new stuff, fresh stuff. I think that's a good way to like leverage both social media where you can see constant clips of like TV shows these days on like TikTok on vertical formats. And then you have all the bigger, heavier hitting stuff on your traditional YouTube, on TV, in trailers before a movie and stuff like that. And you can get a combination of catching people up and just getting people excited that, hey, this is the return of Star Wars to theaters.
Definitely, and I think they have to build on that. I mean, I guess the other thing that's really missing, right? I mean, and you wouldn't include this in a teaser, but they are missing the things that were in that released footage from D23 and from Celebration of like the shots where Din Djarin's just walking and he's like, "My name's Din Djarin," like stuff like that. That people who don't know this movie at all, like, or don't know these characters at all, figure out what this is, right? So I think they need to do that type of stuff. And the best way to do that would be to show a scene from the film. So I would be shocked if that scene isn't the Walker scene because they seem to be heavily leading into that. Just everything from the marketing. I mean, even the poster shows the walkers. We have one shot of the walker falling, even though you don't get any context in this trailer. I think a lot of that stuff seems to be one of the big set pieces early on in the film, considering the film mostly seems to be about the huts and the underworld and stuff. I feel like that might be the opening scene of the movie. If you start with that and then have them, go up to Sigourney Weaver and be like, okay, we did the bounty for you, give us our credits. And then she's like, okay, we got the next thing. We need the hut supply lanes and you need to get Road of the Hut. That can kind of get us in the story. I think the uphill battle with this too is just like, why is the story important enough to be in theaters? Is it if it was the second Mandalorian movie or Mandalorian was always a film franchise, you could have a smaller scale story. But when it's you're going from TV to film, the indication is usually like, this is our biggest story yet. And I don't think it's going to be that. So it has that uphill climb as well. But yeah, I think the marketing really could use as much as possible of like, let's show off our cinematic scenes. And so hopefully they do that and they put something in front of Avatar. Like I kind of said last week too, like Avatar's the weird franchise that doesn't have a massive following of fans. It's got everybody goes and watches it, but you never really hear anybody go, yeah, my favorite movie's Avatar, or my favorite franchise is Avatar. And so it's kind of that perfect audience for getting those swing viewers of like, will this be profitable or not? Because it's a lot of people who love event filmmaking, a lot of people who love big budget action, sci-fi, fantasy filmmaking, and Star Wars is kind of the founder originator of that, of big budget sci-fi filmmaking. If you have obviously some lead in from that group of people into Mandalorian and Grogu with kind of this fresh new, you don't need to know anything Star Wars adventure, that can be a good way to connect those viewers into Mandalorian and Grogu, because Star Wars fans, whatever they say on the internet or not, they will go watch this at least once. Most of them will go watch it. And then they'll either complain about it or love it and go see it multiple times. But you need those people who don't watch Star Wars normally or just go for the big cultural event. The Force Awakens did really well with that. They got people to go as a cultural event who had never seen Star Wars. I mean, I can speak for myself. I went with 30 friends, and most of them had either half of them had probably either never seen Star Wars and only seen it once, and it was a long time ago. The other half were big fans. So you have an amalgamation of people Star Wars appeals to. I think this can be, a 4 quadrant movie, but it has to be something that first gets that audience. Otherwise, it will never get a chance to continue to grow. So it needs good reviews and it needs just a baseline amount of people. But we're going to turn it over to your guys' questions right now, specifically about the Mandalorian and Grogu. Starman 170 says, I find it cool that Zeb from Rebels and Mandalorian season 3 is back in live action again. Yeah, that was probably my single favorite shot of the whole trailer. A little bit biased purely just because I'm a Rebels fan. So it was just cool to see Zeb do something besides walk, but or stand there. But it was still, that was something to me that was like, okay, this character has been on a TV show in live action already, and all we've seen him do is stand there. And then in a shot from the Celebration trailer that was leaked, he walks around for a few seconds. So this kind of proves one of the points of like big CGI character, fluid, fast action. That's, to me, as somebody who's a fan of the TV shows, a little bit more cinematic than we're used to seeing from those specific shows, but it also would be kind of a given that you would expect from a big movie like this. But yeah, I agree. Very, very cool to see him back. And then Starman also says, I also like the actress Sigourney Weaver is in Star Wars after being an alien and Avatar. Yeah, and another thing to tie it into, I mean, that's a good point with Avatar, because I always think of her as Alien first, right? But if you were doing Avatar, you could have her introduce the Mandalorian and Grogu before IMAX screenings and have her be like, hey, everybody, I know you're excited to see Avatar, and we're appreciative of you showing up to watch the film. Before, here, take a sneak peek look at my new movie, The Mandalorian and Grogu, where I get to star with Baby Yoda. And then, you have Baby Yoda show up and do a fun little skit for, a minute and a half with Sigourney Weaver. And then you lead into the movie. I think that works really well as well. So you can tie it full circle there. So that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, it was always very interesting that Zeb was not, penciled in for Ahsoka season 2. I mean, I think that was always a show with a little bit of a limited budget compared to Mando season 3. It was rumored only at 90 million, and it looks pretty good. I know there's a lot of criticism for just the dynamism that comes with season 1 of Ahsoka, and I don't disagree with that. It is a bit static. It's very George Lucas prequel-esque in that sense, where there's a lot of just shots that are like wides and mediums, and you're like, that's cool. Like, can the camera move around a little bit, right? And that's something I want to see, improved and corrected in season 2. We know that he's not going to use as much of the volume, that there's a bigger budget now. It was almost like a prove it sort of season for him after doing a couple episodes on the Mandalorian and stuff like that. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see the reasoning for why Zeb is now part of the Adelphi Rangers. Like, even in Rebels, right? He was never like a guy flying the ship. Like, at most, you could give him credit for like the old Lasat like family members that he finds, and then using the staff to like guide them. Right? That's really about it. I don't think I remember distinctly him like piloting stuff. Even when he was in the earlier episodes, when he was with Ezra and all that, he's always more of like the martial guy. Like, he's the guy shooting stuff or fighting with his hands, with his bow staff, right? So that was always very interesting to me. And even if he was going to be in season 3, Mando, it was just surprising that he wasn't with Callus, right? Like, you can ship them, you can call them best friends, whatever it is. They were a partnership. right? And I just was like, why is he now a starfighter pilot? I know it's like just to kind of do the thing that they do in animation with Star Wars, where they kind of create a model, put it in a season that has a little bit more budget so that they can use it for other stuff later on, kind of like how they did the updated Grievous model in the Clone Wars Siege of Mandalore arc, where they show it like, oh, this is the episode 3 stuff kind of redone a little bit. And you're like, well, why did you just spend all that money on the model? Well, because we get to finally see him do another massacre of the Dathomiri witches, right? And that perspective in Tales of the Empire, right? So I think that's kind of the same thinking here. Like, hey, we can create the model, give it one cool shot here, but then now we have that groundwork laid, and now we can use him in more proper storytelling. So I'm very excited that we saw him like literally run and jump off of a wall and use his staff. That's the Zeb I remember. I wish there was a little bit more of a clear shot. It looked like it wasn't fully finished per se. You could say it's lighting or whatever, but I think this is just a classic example of like you want to show something cool, but you don't necessarily have it fully in its final draft yet of how that'll look. And it looked still pretty solid for how many more months away we are from the film. So still excited that he's finally going to be the Zeb that I remember instead of just like, oh, he's just another X-wing or A-wing pilot with Adelphi, right? So yeah, I'm excited. Right, it'll be a reason for probably why the Razor Crest gets introduced. I don't think they would just be like, oh, here's just a Razor Crest that the New Republic's always had, right? And that's why we identified you all those times in Mando seasons 1 to 2, right? It's like, no, I think it's maybe Zeb's. I think that's the rumor that he has his own. It's just a cheap way to get people to be like, oh, yeah, here we go. He's flying a Razor Crest again. But I'd like it to be Zeb's. I'd like it to be like he's lending it and he's going to be on the mission, at least partially, to help out Mandalorian. Maybe it's like the Mandalorian's trying to get back to like the vibes of season 1 and season 2 within the underworld community. Almost like be like, oh, like we can't like let you be known as the guy who's been hunting down all these Imperial contacts and stuff. Let's go back to like, oh, you're the ruthless killer that just followed all the bounty pucks and all that. So there, I think he's going to be a character that you're like blending a lot of different storytelling purposes together, and then we're still going to see that Rebels version with the action. But for plot and stuff like that, we're going to see, well, yeah, he has a Razor Crest. Yeah, he's why is he with Adelphi? What's he doing with the New Republic? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I still hope it means we get to see Callus. I just don't really have my hopes super high for him to be in the film because I don't know how much Callus would really add to it right now. But I do think that with this timeline of how the show and everything for season 2 of Ahsoka is happening and the movie coming out in May, I do think he would be like a bridge character as well into Ahsoka season 2 because I think he is confirmed for season 2. So having him be meeting up with Ezra, seeing that obviously will be awesome. If Ezra cameos in the movie, that'd also be a really nice connected bridge. Gets people to watch season 2 of Ahsoka. Probably is the final season of that show. So like there's a nice connected bridge with that character where he's bouncing around because of logistics, but at least here you're like, oh, okay, I can at least understand how everything's being interconnected, what the New Republic's doing, which characters are going to be really in play, and why Ahsoka isn't just like set in the Mandoverse. It's a crucial part of the Mandoverse, if not like the second biggest part of the whole thing so far. So I'm excited that he's here for sure. And as far as Sigourney Weaver, I believe her character is Captain Bishop or General Bishop or something. And Bishop is the android from Aliens, which that's a nice Aliens tie-in. So I do agree with you, Liam. I think it'd be super nice for just before like IMAX screenings of Avatar: Fire and Ash, Sigourney Weaver not only introduces the film and stuff, but like also is like, hey, I'm gonna also show up in 6 months with my friend over here, baby Grogu, and give her own version of the events of seasons 1 to 3 and whatever. Just give like a little bit of like a foundation to the general audience. It it makes the most sense. I suspect that's why she was almost directed towards Filoni and Favreau and be like, hey, like this is we need if we're gonna put this into the big screen and with how everything's being laid out for the theatrical slate, here's a sci-fi legend that has always said like she'd be down for Star Wars. This is like the best chance to like make everything work for the corporate interest, for the storytelling interest, for the sci-fi nerd interest and everything. So yeah, definitely excited that she's gonna be there, right? I guess it says Ward. I guess the rumor was Bishop, maybe Ward Bishop or whatever it may be. But either way, she's this big sci-fi legend, and she's gonna be an Avatar, and it's gonna be nice connective tissue to Mandalorian Grogu, which is already like Liam said, on an uphill climb towards justifying, like, is this just a movie conversion, or is this going to be elevated up to movie worthy watch for Star Wars?
Yeah, exactly. And I think having that big screen introduction from somebody would do wonders. And we've seen that a lot lately. I mean, just on movies that are already out, like thanking people for coming to the theaters. It never hurts to do that, one, because you just show a little bit of appreciation for your audience. But two, I think it creates that synergy between products so well. And we saw that recently. I mean, Star Wars just did it with Revenge of the Sith. Hayden Christensen did an introduction before Revenge of the Sith. But even like something like Top Gun Maverick, uh, Tom Cruise was like before the screenings was like, "Hey, thanks for coming and watching this," and if the more they do that, I think it does connect to the audience, sticks with you a little bit more because it is an outreach thing. You're basically thanking the audience for being a part of that experience. So I would love to see that. I think that's a really cool like thing I didn't think about before, but now when you bring up Avatar as a Sigourney Weaver property, which I don't necessarily always think about, because again, like Avatar is something I've seen the first one 3 or 4 times, but it's been years since I've watched it, and I only watched the second one once in theaters. So it's not something that's a part of my, like, pop culture references. It's not something I think about all the time with pop culture. It's just purely because it's so big financially that we think about it all the time, and I think that's a great connective tissue. Again, that type of audience, the audience that's coming to see Avatar is gonna be the one that's crucial for Mandalorian and Grogu really becoming a profitable movie rather than just a movie that might be pretty good. Moving back up to the top, we're gonna stick with Mandalorian and Grogu for right now until we get your guys's most of your conversation. Maybe we'll go until about the hour mark, and then we'll start taking the other questions. So again, keep firing in your questions. If you have something about Mandalorian and Grogu, let us know what your thoughts were on the trailer, or what's your favorite parts, least favorite parts, all that. Let us know in the comments. So Anthony Tiff says, "It's been a while, guys, back in school. Just wanted to say I'm excited for The Mandalorian and Grogu. Looks really good, and I'm excited to see Ryan Gosling in Starfighter." Well, glad you're excited, Anthony. Hopefully you join us soon. We miss hearing from you. And then Brandon says, "Do you think The Mandalorian and Grogu could bring back and unite Star Wars fandom together, even though Mandalorian Season 3 was mid to some people?" I think you need a lot more work before you can say the Star Wars fandom is united. Again, I don't know if it'll ever be truly united because it really hasn't been united since like the 80s. Um, but the more quality products you make, the more obvious it is that there are people out there who are just purely wanting to hate everything, if almost everything is at least good, right? This is what I've been saying for years. If you make stuff that is up for debate on its merits, some people really love certain things. Like with Ahsoka, I think both of us really enjoyed a lot of the swings it went for with Star Wars lore, a lot of the new things introduced, like Peridia and different galaxies and all that stuff. There was a lot of thought and like creativity and passion behind the storytelling in Ahsoka. When it comes to the filmmaking side, when it comes to the pacing side, when it comes to some of those other things, you left it up for debate with its middling quality. How much did you enjoy the content versus how much did you enjoy the product, right? A lot of Star Wars has been that lately. Sometimes it's really polished looking, but poor story. Sometimes the story's interesting, but it's not very polished. And so when you leave stuff up to debate on what you're looking for, then you invite criticism where like nobody's really right and nobody's really wrong. And again, film is subjective, but when you make stuff that's when you make a bunch of movies that are like 75%, 80% or higher on Rotten Tomatoes, Metacritic scores like 65 to 75 every time. Audience ratings are usually in the 7 out of 10 range. It makes it more obvious when people are hating on everything, every single release, that those people are haters, versus if you make a bunch of stuff that's like 5 out of 10 reviewed and somewhere between a 4 and a 6 for a lot of fans, then you invite those people who want to hate to really hate. So that was a tangent, but all of that is to say that, like, I don't think Mandalorian can unite the fandom. I don't think anything will unite the fandom, but like overall. I think certain projects like Andor people can really love and majority will really like. But I don't think the Mandalorian and Grogu will like redeem Star Wars. I think you need a lot more projects, especially when we're talking about theatrical, because theatrical Star Wars is restarting, and the last place we left it really was on three pretty divisive movies. The last one being the most like consensus, not a very good movie. The other two being really well critically received, like The Last Jedi, but the fans were mixed, and then Solo being kind of not as well critically received, but a lot of the fans seem to like it more. So you have this kind of divide already in theatrical Star Wars. Not to mention Disney Plus Star Wars has been pretty divided amongst this specific time period with Mandalorian and Grogu, not just with season 3, but Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka. The last 3 outings from this New Republic era have all been either mixed received or not very well received. So I think in general, it's going to take Mandalorian being really great, Ahsoka being really great, and then whatever Mandalorian sequel you do being really great in order to fully get the fandom back on board with this specific story. But they absolutely can do it. And I hope it's great. And I hope they do well with it. But it remains to be seen. I think we need a few more hits before we can really say that this specific project is the beginning of the transformation of Star Wars back into something that most people are genuinely excited for.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that, and I think to your point, Brandon Tran, like I think I'm gonna focus more on the latter half of what you're saying about Mando season 3 being mid to some people, right? Like, yeah, I know Liam doesn't really love it. I am still a defender for a lot of its choices. I just have over time really come to be frustrated with, like, again, Book of Boba Fett being undercut, and when you could have had 2 of those episodes just be in Mandalorian season 3 into that storylines there, and you could have rearranged the pirate stuff and the Mandalore stuff and actually built towards it through the season and had much better pacing overall. But I to that point about Mando season 3, that was the last place we left it, right? Like, you can say Ahsoka season 1 is technically the leaving off point, but I don't know. It's a little different because, yes, we get Thrawn and he gets his escape into the galaxy. Some people didn't love that. They're like, "Oh, he's not tactically superior and all that." It's like, well, he's resource starved. Like, and even in Heir to the Empire and everything, when he loses and he knows he's losing, he runs. Like, he's not stupid, right? So I don't fully agree with some people what they're saying there with Thrawn, but I can see, like, the aura of him not being quite there in season 1 probably throws some people off. But Ahsoka as a whole, it takes place in a different galaxy, right? Like, all the things that are happening in Ahsoka that are in the current place galaxy, it has nothing to do with Mandalorian. It's trying to, like, bridge a Rebel season 5 that never really happened with Ahsoka as one of the lead characters, and then being like, okay, and then here's Ahsoka season 1. So it has its own problems there and all that, but it has nothing to do with Din Djarin and nothing to do with Grogu, right? So even within this Mandoverse per se, like, there is like a 2 distinct pivots. There's everything Mandalorian related, and then there's Ahsoka, right? Skeleton Crew is just a floater. It's a one-off, and I hope they're integrated somewhere else, but it's a nice one and done story. That's the way you can kind of look at that, right? But these 2 big pivots, we're gonna probably end Ahsoka season 2 as like the finishing point of everything streaming related to this Mandoverse era. We've changed this big Mandalorian storylines into a movie now, and it's a tweener because it's like, yeah, it didn't end super strong for a lot of people there. I'll agree with that, but you still want that overall one of the most well received parts of Star Wars in the streaming era to be elevated again, right? So I think instead of saying all of the Star Wars fandom, I think it's more of uniting like the general audience around Mandalorian, because a lot of people are like, we waited so long for Mando season 3 and it was undone back in 2022. A lot of our hope for it was false hope because it was already undercut by a different show because they weren't willing to trust us as an audience to be like, oh, Din without Grogu, how does that story play out? How do these 2 characters live individually, right? They, to be frank, Lucasfilm just got scared, right? Like, yes, we're all staying at home and everything, but come on, guys, like, you don't trust us to like just see Din do cool things. That was basically like the first 2.5 episodes of the show, anyways. We were drawn into the guy himself. We weren't like, oh, Baby Yoda. Like, that was a huge hook, but Baby Yoda doesn't really do much of anything in season 1. A lot more in season 2, definitely a lot more in season 3, but still, like, you don't really need to have these characters be immediately brought together. Like, cool Luke sequence and all that, but that also brings its own issues. Like, okay, what sort of Jedi is he becoming? What's he doing with his academy? Those things that just didn't need to be explained at that point in time. So making the people that love Mandalorian season 1 and 2 but didn't love season 3 come back and be like, "Oh, four-turn movie," and I'm excited for getting a proper conclusion for the first 10 years of the New Republic and having it all be in the movies, and Ahsoka kind of being that show that gives a lot of the background and fleshes out a lot of those details about the defense fleet, about what Thrawn's forces are looking like, which parts of the galaxy are kind of come under his hand, what's the underworld doing? Is that where Boba Fett happens? Is this where we can get see more Legends characters like Talon Card or like a canonized Mara Jade? Stuff like this can still jump between the shows and all that. That's where a character like Zeb, like I was talking about, being a pivot between the movie tweener universe that's happening with the Mandalorian side of it, but still being able to jump and be essential to the lore of the Rebels characters that are leading Ahsoka. I think that's going to be really good to elevate both of these properties, and when one of them has to become a movie franchise because they're the most recognizable and well-received characters, right? You can love Andor and everything, but Andor is still carried by its actors, not necessarily its characters, and they're all Cassian is already established in Rogue One. You already know his end. This is just getting everything fleshed out and dealing with such mature storytelling that unless you're like really trying to see an HBO level drama, you might not be like super down to watch that and have fun in movie theaters seeing like a condensed version of an Andor season 2, for example. But if you get a condensed streamlined version of Mando season 4 here that cuts away a lot of the fat and the weird choices that were being made in Book of Boba Fett and Mando season 3, and it's a good strong hit, and then you're like, oh, you know what, I saw some insane sequences that would have been pretty good in the show, but now became a different, like a whole battlefield plays out and there's way more Mandalorians, or there's like a whole New Republic ship fight or something, or like we see like the Shadow Council, First Order machinations. If we just see scale and the story's told well, people will be back into the Mando verse fully. Right now, because there hasn't been a strong end to Mando season 3, you have people who are dismayed and don't necessarily want to return to that world. They're like, it's too late, and they might have a point, but it's definitely being drowned out. I feel like online, especially by like the Andor elitists being like, oh, like, see, this was a terrible teaser. Like, of course, like we've lost all the sauce of Star Wars and movie making from the sequels and from Andor and all that. And it's like I can see why people are a little worried for sure. But if this movie does right, if its marketing is improved month after month and everything leads up to it nicely and it becomes a big expansive event film that just rides off the vibes of the original Mandalorian a couple seasons and tells a strong story that feels movie worthy, I think you unite that fandom again. Then you get those people excited, you get them ready for Ahsoka season 2. It's probably just a one and done there. You don't have a season 3 probably in the books. Bring up all the characters as necessary to the movie universe level of that. You're excited, you're happy. Starfighter has its own challenges. I'm not going to dive into that, but if you can get the Mandoverse sub fandom back on top, you frankly you grab the bigger general audience than Andor ever could, and Rogue One maybe had back in 2016, right? If you can get the closest thing to that sort of sub fandom with the Mandoverse back and activated, then you've rehabilitated a huge part of current day Star Wars.
Again, we're taking questions about The Mandalorian and Grogu. So if you guys have anything to say about it, what were your favorite scenes, your favorite moments from the trailer? Did you like the trailer? Did you dislike it? Send it in to the chat and we'll get to your comments first if it's specifically about The Mandalorian and Grogu. Next up is Critical Thinker, who says, I found the trailer very forgettable. We got nothing new and nothing looks particularly impressive or intriguing. The film is clearly banking on nostalgia, Baby Yoda, and being Star Wars, since nothing in particular catches my interest. And for a film budget, it doesn't look particularly visually impressive. I kind of like the design of those mech suits. That's kind of it. Well, I can't disagree with pretty much anything you said in the latter half of that in terms of the visual nature of what makes something cinema, right? This is something that was definitely a safe trailer in every way because it really went for the teaser vibe. And again, I think a lot of thoughts on this overall would be completely different if they had released this same thing back in April when we were 13 months away from the film coming out, rather than now 8 months away from the film coming out. And if it was, tied in with the initial marketing from Celebration, I can understand why a lot of people this is not working for, and this and your thoughts as well, critical thinker. Like I can understand why it's not working for you. I personally, again, really like the idea of teaser trailers. Most of them usually come out a year or more before the film. Like the first Force Awakens trailer told you absolutely nothing about the movie whatsoever, and even had a lot of shots that never even made the cut for the film. But it was 13 months before the movie came out, and you understood that like there's the post production process, and we're probably not going to see it. This movie is probably like at least in the editing stage, the assembly stage, pretty close to being done in the assembly phase for this movie. They're mostly, I'm assuming, working on sound and VFX and all those things that they're tweaking up. But as for the sequences that they specifically have, I'd imagine they have got pretty far so far on this. And the fact that they've been done shooting this for a year now or so. Like they had a trailer back at D23 last August. So I don't know if they were done shooting at that point, but they've been done for close to a year, if not a year now. They have more to show, and for some reason they decided now is just the time to let people know this exists, not to impress people. I don't know. We'll see if that ultimately pays off or not. But I don't disagree with you that it didn't show much. I don't think it's necessarily banking on nostalgia because I don't think that's what they're going for with this. This is going for look at this world, look at what's here, look at this creature, look at that creature. This is a Star Wars kind of underworld visual effects in terms of like classic visual effects, puppetry, animatronics, packed Star Wars event. I think that's what they're going for with this is like, look at this puppet move, look at that puppet move, look at this creature you've seen before, look at that creature you've seen before. I don't think it's relying on like winks and nods from nostalgia bait that we usually kind of see with these types of things. Like Force Awakens definitely had a lot of nostalgia shots in its trailers. This to me doesn't necessarily have that full nostalgia base, but it does have a lot of stuff that just teases you at what's this moment going to be, what's that moment going to be, and it never actually pays off. But I do also agree with you that I absolutely love those mechs that you see at the end. I don't know if they're suits or if they're actual giant robots, and I would prefer them to be giant robots rather than suits. But I think those are pretty awesome. Like we haven't really seen much of that in Star Wars film or TV, and I would love to see it. And just the whole staging of that room, that like kind of hut room or hut vault or whatever it is, really reminds me of something like KOTOR when you have the Rancor guarding that gate. And you have to, put the bomb in the dead body so that it eats it and blows up. Like I think the way it's staged, it reminds me a lot of that too. So I love that shot. I enjoyed the trailer more than you did, Critical Thinker, but your interpretation of it is seemingly something that most people, or not most people, but at least 50% of the people seem to agree with.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's been mixed. I can't. I don't think there is like a super huge positive spin on it. I think people are like, okay, at least it started. That's like the most positive I think people have been feeling about it, which is good. It also came at a fairly tense point with like how ABC and its syndication has been handling the Kimmel situation. When we recorded our trailer reaction, it just broken that he's coming back today or came back today. So I don't know if this is even the trailer that they intended on putting on. There could have been like a way more explosive trailer that they really wanted to put out, but they're like, oh, we don't want people to just downvote and bomb this one away. Like might just be a one to just take a like a little less of a audience chunk and attention span, but at least it's if anything happens to this one, we can like live with this one being safe, right? And then once the ones that get attached to the films or come out next couple ones, I think those will be the big ones. Those will be the modifications of the D23. I think we'll start to get a little bit more new stuff out of it for sure. Yeah, I can understand that sentiment, and I'm not going to disagree it at all. I disagree with the sense of like what's left of the old Mando viewer base. Mando season 3, despite almost a 3-year absence, is still like I believe the third highest viewed season of all the Disney Plus shows. So it's not that they all just disappeared, right? I think it's just more that it was a gap, and then people were like kind of shocked that Grogu was already back, and it was like, oh, you're telling me I have to go kind of do semi homework for a TV show about Boba Fett that if you look up right within a year or two of it coming out, people had settled into like it's not very good, and I don't really like watching this, but now I have to watch this because it undercuts everything starting up in Mando season 3. I had many friends that were like, "Oh, I have to watch Book of Boba Fett," and it's not like they don't like Boba Fett as a character, but they're just like, I kind of wanted all the Grogu stuff to be handled in the Mandalorian. And I'm like, you're right. Even now, when we're getting the physical editions, the 4K steelbooks, we've gotten Mando 1, 2, and 3 announced. Right? I think 1 and 2 came out. I don't know if 3 came out just yet, but we still don't have an announcement for a steelbook for Book of Boba Fett,
Mhm.
and that has the literal story that brings Grogu back in here. Right? Like it's a shame of how they've handled that, right? So I think it's more of like they just stumbled a lot with Book of Boba Fett. That's hurt a little bit with season 3. Season 3 obviously had its own fair share of mistakes for sure, but I think it's more of that. So I don't think there's like a huge drop off, right? Ahsoka had a huge uphill battle in terms of homework, and it still did pretty good viewership wise. So enough to get itself a season 2 would have improved budget. So I disagree with that. Like, oh, that there's like what's left of the old base. Like the base is still there. They're just waiting for a season 4. They're clamoring for a season 4. They wanted to be better than season 3. Now they're getting a movie. And if you play your cards right here, you'll supercharge a lot of that base. You don't necessarily bring everybody back, but that's the nice thing about movies. You don't necessarily have to bring that base back. You can bring enough of those people who have watched the TV show, or at least the first couple, and then you get the general audience to be like, "Oh, this is the first Star Wars movie in theaters since The Rise of Skywalker. I'll go check it out." Right? It's a soft reboot in a lot of ways. Um, but yeah, I get that point. I fully agree with the mech suit thing. Like, I hope it's droids. It really does feel like that Kotor thing. That looks very cool. And those are the things that I think people would have been excited for. If we saw some really weird, strange things and like big, expansive things, I think that would have really gotten people much more like, oh, I'm excited for it. But unfortunately, it's just a cutesy and fun trailer. It's very heavy on the animatronics, which I don't hate. I loved seeing how much smoother Grogu was walking and jumping around. I noticed that's some of the little things that you can do with a movie level budget where you're not trying to hide away like a man dressed in a 3D green suit that's operating the puppet and all that. Like it just looks smoother about him in the water and everything. It's a nice blend of the CGI version of the character and the animatronics, right? Especially when now he has this little Angelin big brother gang around him too, and it worked really well. But it's small, it's tiny, and I fully get with that. And I also, frankly, I thought the beginning of the trailer wasn't super well edited. It was almost trying to go for that Force Awakens teaser where it's like 15 seconds of black and then okay, here's a cool shot of Finn jumping up from the sand, right, and all that, and another black. Okay, now here's Ray jumping on a speeder, right? I think if they had done that, but with more kinetic shots of Grogu and Din Djarin and a little bit more bigger stuff, without necessarily being like, oh, here's like a AT&T sequence, or here's a sorry, AT-AT sequence, here's a hut fight sequence, or the Mentalian Savrep, right? If they had just done them more like running or jumping, I think a little bit more dynamic stuff, I think it would have been cool. I found myself a little like strangely like turned off by like seeing like, okay, black screen, and it pops up and it's Sigourney Weaver sitting at the base, right? Like if it was her like walking and talking, it was just a little bit of dynamism missing from it. That's the stuff that feels very TV heavy, and we know that this doesn't look super TV heavy in every shot because we've seen the leak trailer, and the leak trailer has way more of the budget immediately showing there. So if they had gone a little bit more of dynamic shots and still have more shots like how we saw with these enforcer droids around the vault, I think this would have been a trailer that got a lot more excitement out of it. Instead, it kind of went for fun, cutesy, and remind you that, hey, this is coming out next year, and it probably was the safest thing to do with the Kimmel situation. Probably, I hope that they have a better trailer in the next couple months for sure.
Well, especially with the Kimmel thing going on, like it just makes you wonder, like, why there was no specific reason you had to release a trailer now. I mean,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
there was there was no mandate for like, hey, there needs to be a Mandalorian and Grogu trailer on September 22nd, otherwise, this movie's going to make $0. Like I don't understand why they would do that just in general, because you knew the comments in the video were all going to be about that. You knew like just the whole thing, it was like getting sacrificed. Almost like it just really didn't know, there was no really rhyme or reason for it. So that's still a little baffling to me that they would do that specifically, especially when the reports last week were that they were saving it until everything blew over, but then it hadn't blown over yet and they released it anyways. It's like, okay. Um, yeah, if they would have waited till today, even, I think it would have been better. But oh well. Yeah, we got what we got, and we'll see where it goes from there. Next up is Gerardo Padilla, who says, I'm excited for this movie, but I don't think this was a great trailer. Hyped, though. Yeah, and that's kind of how I feel, too. I mean, again, I like this as a piece of teaser art. Like, teaser trailers are like this. I know a lot of people aren't accustomed to watching teaser trailers anymore because we never get them. I truly do feel like the last one I've really seen for a big budget movie is The Force Awakens. And we don't really get them anymore. Like this other sequels didn't do, over a year before teaser trailers. We got them at Celebration, our first trailer, and then we would get another one later at the end of the summer. And we kind of just did the 2 trailer thing. With this, they gave us a full teaser. Again, teasers usually come out about a year to a little over a year before. So we really should have seen this earlier. But I like this as a teaser trailer. Now, 8 months away from the movie, I would have preferred a full trailer, especially because they've done a full trailer already for 2 conventions. And they could have just, I mean, again, we both saw both versions of it leaked online. Obviously, not great quality. I can't tell how good the VFX shots and everything look, right? Because it's all secondhand. But both of those trailers looked like they could have just released them, and they had a narrative to them, they had a flow to them, they had some impressive sequences. I think specifically the newest one with the Walker scene and the hallway tracking shot, like it's all one big long shot of Din Djarin taking down a bunch of stormtroopers or snowtroopers. That is cinematic level. Like that looked really cool. And I think you'd add something to that. So we'll see what they decide to release next. But yeah, I think it is a little baffling, the way this is all just kind of unfolded over the last few days, because it just kind of, it doesn't really help this project. And the point of our discussion kind of last week about the Starfighter images and stuff was Starfighter needs help, sure, with marketing because it's a brand new IP, but the Mandalorian Grogu also needs help, and they're not, not necessarily helping the movie with the way they've released things. Gerardo says, yeah, they should have waited for the Kimmel thing to be over. Trailer's getting a lot of hate because of that. Um, Critical Thinker says this is less about the trailer and more about the show, but Din Djarin has really lost so much personality since season 2. His development about breaking out of his cult is gone. He's not allowed to do anything morally questionable anymore. He's just an action figure now. I think I get where you're coming from, because I think they dumbed him down a lot in his arc, what it could have been, and I agree with Sonic's points that he made earlier about Boba Fett and the removal of the Grogu storyline from that show entirely would have made Din's journey in season 3, even if Grogu does come back. Because I think we all, I don't know how you feel, Critical Thinker, but in the moment when I watched season 2, I fully expected Grogu to be back. I did not think he was gone forever. There was no way. But I was hoping it was at the end of season 3. And I think this also speaks again to the continued issue that's plaguing Hollywood, film, TV, everything right now. And I'll say it a million times. You guys are probably tired of me saying it, but the length between seasons and the length between sequels is killing these IPs, because you have this project, and one of the reasons season 1, season 2 feel so cohesive, feel like such a great journey for the character of Din Djarin, is that they go back to back. You only had a 1 year gap between watching one season to watching the next season, less than 1 year by the time season 1 ended and season 2 started, right? And that's what classic TV always has done, is it makes you feel, if characters have slow burn journeys, or if characters, you know, have a season where they don't change quite as much, you still feel it if you have a season every year. If you wait 3 years for the next season like we did with season 3, and then you wait another 3 years for the next story, you'll lose that character in your mind, you lose that journey, you lose interest in that, and so if you don't have a complete arc, a lot of that falls flat. And so, while I disagree if you're implying that he can't get that back, that you can't do emotional stuff with him anymore, that you can't dive into a lot of the stuff that made him interesting in season 1 and 2, you absolutely still can do that. But I think season 3 tried to juggle so many different things, it dropped the ball on it. It had the Mandalorian plot, which I think, frankly, the thing that was upsetting about season 3 and still upsets me is it has moments, it has some even good episodes, but it doesn't have moments that really hit, because it tries to do everything all at once, and then it sacrifices the big plot threads that are set up from the previous season. What it does is try to set new plot points up, and then tries to fulfill those plot lines, but it doesn't fulfill the plot lines that you're already invested in. So Grogu disappears at the end of season 2. Well, he's just back in season 3. If you don't watch Boba Fett, he's just back. So that's not resolved. Din Djarin struggling with the religious implications of being with Bo-Katan and her people versus the children of the Watch. That's not necessary. That's a plot point in it, and it's resolved, right? And they have moments like saving the kid in that season, John Favreau's kid in that season, where they kind of unite the tribes, right? And you have moments in the second to last episode that help unite the tribes, but you don't have those moments specifically for Din Djarin. You have them amongst the larger group. Even Paz Vizsla gets like more moments in that type of story than Din Djarin does. Then you have flashback episodes with Grogu that are never realized. You have the world building around the Empire and the whole Elia Kane episode that kind of doesn't come back really at all. You have Moff Gideon, who's teased the whole season and then doesn't show up till the 7th episode. There's just a lot with season 3 that skips around and jumps around, and then not to mention the big plot point set up from the season 2 finale of the Darksaber and what's going to happen with that, and is Din Djarin going to be the new Mandalore? All is wrapped up in the last like 5 minutes of the worst episode of the whole show. And so I think that's more of the concern, is the specifically the writing and pacing of it all. And it's one of the reasons I'm a little more confident in this specific project, is because you're stripping everything away and you're going back to the core of Din Djarin and Grogu going on adventures, and the things that happen around them will inform their decisions and who they are and what they become. But again, a lot of those big plot points they set up, they did absolutely drop the ball with. So I won't disagree with you there, but I do think this is a character who has enough richness and has had enough richness that you can get back to it. It's just a matter of what story they decide to pick that specifically adds those old religious elements and those old Mandalorian specific elements to this specific story. And I think it'll be interesting to see where they go with that and how it's all connected to the underworld and that type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in a franchise, you're gonna have bad storytelling. I think it's just a nature of it. It sucks that it has to happen in a TV show season that was like 3 years awaited, and especially one that again was undercut from the beginning because they weren't willing to trust their audience for one extra year, right? That still bums me out. That being said, I have to disagree like Liam does. Like I don't think that we can say that the character has lost its richness. Even in those episodes of Book of Boba Fett, Mando 2.5 episodes, I think he's handled really well. Like his whole first fight with Paz Vizsla, hearing about the Night of a Thousand Tears and everything. I think he's actually done quite well. And like his interactions with Boba, really good. Right. It's just a shame that Boba loses all his screen time. Right. That's the bigger issue. So it's really just season 3. And like Liam said, too many new plot points that are juggled for like a possible season 4, right? Even though with the timing and spacing of how everything was handled in the pipeline at that point in streaming being clogged up, what should have been a priority season kind of became something that like had to wait because Filoni is now on Ahsoka season 1. He can't just jump between sets like that as easily, right? And Favreau, I think we also have to like, as much as people like are us included, we're like, oh yeah, Favreau is going to be like one of those big, huge guys for Star Wars TV. Mandalorian was his first ever TV show, right? Like it's insane to think about for how prestigious his career has been and how much he's really pulled, yeah, out of the magic hat, right? All these films that have never really had sometimes the best foundation, like Iron Man notoriously never had a script. Him and uh, Robert Downey Jr. were writing on set, right? Like it's insane what he's been able to pull off, especially with such VFX heavy franchises. All right. Once he finally got to a TV show with all those issues that kind of come up with, like, okay, scripts not being fully set, things are in motion, and now has a disadvantage of the volume having to have all of its shots and its pre-VFX be done before you even start shooting. It definitely hampered it back. Both of them, Filoni and Favreau, really talked about like how we're going to use a lot more close sets, a lot more green screen and blue screen, have this volume technology be part of the arsenal of their filmmaking. So I think there's a lot of things there that, it's a very boring answer, but I think season 3 at that point, they'd almost already maximized how they can do a lot of these things that with the volume, right? And we have that Lego set that was came out with everything kind of going on with the little Mandalorian fleet of Bo-Katan's and the whole space battle that seemingly was going to happen with like the TIE interceptors and everything never happens in the season, right? And this is a season that's just overstuffed with so many different things, so much VFX, so much interesting and fun things for sure, but not cohesive things, right? The everything that happens in episode 3 with Elia Kane on Coruscant, it looks really cool, right? And I know you're saying he doesn't feel like a mysterious, morally. He was never morally questionable. I think that's the whole thing that I have to disagree with. The moment that he like dropped off Grogu and then turned back from him, he grew a spine. He realized, I'm not. This is not the right thing. I'm not gonna let this kid just be. He literally asks questions. What are you gonna do with the child? He kind of gives up the whole moral thing. He becomes like a good guy doing, things that his trade requires him to do. He has a code, kind of like Boba does, except they become a little too similar. That's a criticism I have of that, but I don't have a criticism of him being morally questionable. He wasn't morally questionable by episode 3. It had already flipped the script completely, so I have to disagree with that. But now that he's getting a movie, right? Movies, especially Star Wars movies, have a way of like making these big character beats happen because you're seeing on such scale, you're seeing things happening in the action, things with their quieter moments in between different sets and all that. I think Din will get a lot of the stuff that he got sidetracked with in season 3, like everything with the dark saber, everything with Bo-Katan and all that. Now that you've kind of stripped him away back to just, hey, he's working for the New Republic as like a contractor essentially, and because his focus is again training his son that has been returned to him, you'll get back to what we really saw were the strengths of the character season 1 and season 2. And season 3, one of my biggest disappointments, especially because of how big we saw Pedro Pascal become in the last year or two compared to even just a couple of years ago, we didn't get to have like a third sequence of him taking off his helmet. And like, what does that mean, right? Like, we saw that in season 1, we saw that in season 2, we saw the progression there. He's a great scene with Bo-Katan about like, pledging himself to her, saying like, I will never doubt you, like, you've fought so hard for our, our people and all that, right? That's a great scene. And if he had taken off his helmet there, right, that would have been insane, right? That would have been like really cool stuff there. But it doesn't happen because he was unavailable. There's a lot of stuff about season 3 that the technology and the timeline of like streaming and how everything was kind of collapsing underneath it rapidly. Favreau not having Filoni to back him up in the writing and all that, everything being overstuffed, it all kind of came to a head. So it's not a great season. I still really enjoy a lot of it, but I can admit a lot of the flaws too. Putting him back in a director's chair for a movie, stripping down the character to the base of where he was in season two's end, and you can say Book of Boba Fett if you really want to be pedantic. I think we're gonna see a lot of things in season 3 be recontextualized and just be presented as like a soft reboot of like, okay, this is what you kind of remember, and that stuff sort of regressed with him as a character, but we were just gonna plow ahead and make sure he doesn't regress further. Now we can get back to where we are in the storytelling, and once you have a 2.5 hour film and you have him as a central focus, you don't have presumably a Bo-Katan and a Boba Fett taking up all his screen time. It's just those two as the characters in almost every scene. I'm not worried about him just becoming a generic action figure. He's going to have those action sequences, but he's going to have plenty of time to grow as a character once again. So there's just something about Star Wars movies. Even if you don't love the choices that characters make, 20 minutes is in a movie is almost more than enough compared to like 20 minutes in a TV show for a character.
Especially when the TV show episodes are a lot of them 30 minutes.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
nowadays. But yeah, I think what we're not seeing here again, we the plot synopsis they released was a bunch of nothing. You know, it was exactly what we expected. The trailer they released is a teaser. We're still not seeing anything about what this story is. So it's really hard to actually say this isn't going to touch on anything important for the character of Din Djarin. This isn't going to do something fascinating with his story. Yes, the things that made him interesting from season 1 and 2 and the things that made his and Grogu's stories compelling were kind of upended by Boba Fett in season 3. There's no denying it, but those things were going to happen regardless. They were just hopefully going to happen better than they ended up being, and they weren't. So now it was always kind of the issue with whatever season 4 was or season 5. You know, I really feel like season 3 was maybe when they started figuring out they wanted to do a film for this series, and they combined a bunch of stuff because season 3 really feels like the pacing of season 3 and 4, plus with Boba Fett being kind of season 3 already. It just those story beats deserved more time, and especially a lot different structure. Like especially in hindsight, the Elia Kane stuff fits nowhere into the season. It didn't even. I mean, at the time we were kind of speculating, right, that it would show up in Ahsoka, but it doesn't even really show up in Ahsoka at all. You don't really get any Shadow Council stuff in Ahsoka. You don't get really any of that, right? So there's so much in season 3 that just feels all over the place and then didn't get payoff. And so now it's really up to this and Ahsoka season 2 to give it payoff. But yeah, I think what season 3 should have done should have been the Din Djarin struggling with his dual identities as a Mandalorian. These people he respects, like Bo-Katan, who helped him get Grogu to the Jedi, and Boba Fett, who take off their helmets with his loyalties to his cult. And how does that work? And now with this added burden of having the symbolism of the dark saber and being basically the next Mandalore, and I really think they should have done something with the Children of the Watch, actually revering that and believing in that symbol, because I think that would have added a little bit more towards like the political struggle for power between these two Mandalorian factions, and like one of them claiming Din as their own versus the other one claiming Din for themselves as well. Like he would have been somebody divided between two peoples, and then within that you take a season off from Grogu, and then in season 4 you maybe have that subsided with his journey into becoming Mandalore or to passing Mandalore on to Bo-Katan, and then with that you explore how lonely he is and how he misses Grogu and all of that type of stuff. That's really where they should have gone, but they didn't. And again, it took 3 years to get season 3. And at this pace, you're never going to keep up a compelling story if you're doing 3 years in between seasons. So again, you've got to get these seasons out faster. You have to have season 2, the concept written, and the ideas. People, you have to have them come uh, into fruition prior to the season coming out so that you get the next season. I think really season 3 should have been ready to go or close to ready to go after season 2 because of how successful season 1 was. It's not like they didn't have a track record of like this was really good and big for us on our streaming service. So they should have had season 3 ready. They just thought Boba Fett would give them the same amount of viewership and interest that Mandalorian did, and ultimately didn't. Which is where all this, I think, all this band-aiding and duct tape really came into the story, because Boba Fett didn't succeed like they wanted it to. Mandalorian season 3 was then on the way. It's like, what do we do with all these different pieces? It kind of just felt like they said, screw it, let's just wrap it up in season 3 and then we'll go from there. And now we've got what we got. But yeah, those are our thoughts on Mandalorian and Grogu. And again, you guys keep sending in your questions or comments or anything you'd like to discuss with Mandalorian and Grogu. We will get to them as soon as we can, but we're going to turn it over to the rest of the chat right now to take your guys' questions and anything you'd like to discuss. Again, doesn't always have to be about Star Wars. So if you have something you'd like to talk about that isn't Star Wars related, we take non-Star Wars questions as well. So if you're interested in getting our thoughts on anything, send it in to the chat. Super chat is always greatly appreciated, and it does guarantee your question on tonight's show, and we will answer it first before any of the other chats. You can also join our Patreon or YouTube membership programs, where you can join for $5 a month and get priority chat access that will guarantee your questions to be on the shows every week. All right, let's turn back to the chat. And I believe we left off here with Brandon, who said, thoughts on Spider-Man Brand New Day now that Tom Holland is injured on set last Friday for doing a Jackie Chan stunt similar to when Viggo Mortensen injured his foot when he played Aragorn in Lord of the Rings. So, yeah, I don't know what will happen production-wise with that. I've been reading a lot of conflicting reports around that specific injury with Tom Holland. At first, it sounded extremely serious, like life-threatening. They were making it sound like, and then it was like, oh, he's fine, but he might need some time off from shooting. Now, there's obviously the way these productions are lined. It's a very specific type process, especially when you're on location and you're paying for location and you're doing all these things. They might have some shots that they can shift around to get, their establishing shots and their second unit done and all of those things maybe a little ahead of schedule, but it's going to be tough for them to just keep up with that same pace. I would be surprised if they moved off of their release date, especially because we're still, just barely over a year away from the end of July. We're, 10 months away. So they've got plenty of time, but I'm just glad to hear that Tom is okay and that everything is fine with his health and that he's getting back to it soon. But yeah, I'm very excited for the movie. If that's what you're asking as well on my thoughts on the film, like I'm excited to see what they've got next in store for Spider-Man. I'm excited to see a Spider-Man that's pulled out. As much as I'm a big Homecoming fan, I really do like Homecoming and a lot of what they did there with kind of the high school version of Spider-Man. But it was starting to, get a little bit old, that not that group, because I like all those characters, but like just kind of that vibe. So I'm interested in seeing them age up Tom and give him a little bit more mature things to deal with in his story. And so I'm excited to see where they go with all of that. And the additions of Punisher obviously adds a lot more maturity to the story. And Hulk, hopefully we get a little bit more of the classic Hulk and not the Professor Hulk stuff we've seen. So I'm very excited for what they have in store. Love seeing that they're doing so many practical stunts and all that type of stuff too. But yeah, hopefully Tom's okay and they can get back filming as well, because not really sure what else is coming out around then, but usually no big studios want to drop major blockbusters in August or September. So we'd be probably looking at an October date if they pushed it back. Not really sure what's coming out in October next year, but I don't think they're going to want to push it back. So we will see what happens ultimately in post. But it's when they're losing Tom, it's going to delay parts of the production for sure.
From what I've been following, I think, yeah, the way it was first reported, it was like, oh my God, like something terrible's gone wrong. But from my understanding, he's just not going to be filming for a week because he has a concussion. So I think he should be fine. I think they'll just use a stunt double for whatever scenes they need to do. Anyways, that's the great appeal about a character like Spider-Man, especially this version of Spider-Man that's going to be a lot closer to like the comics version where he has two separate identities. He's not publicly known anymore. Like that's the whole point of the spell, and his choice to not tell MJ and Ned at the end of No Way Home, right? So I think we'll be fine. I don't think it'll drastically change anything. Yeah, I think today the latest news was that we got Tombstone casting, which is pretty cool too. So it's like, yeah, they're, from what I can tell, they're gonna have like a lot of different villains, maybe a montage sequence, maybe a couple of them ganging up together for more like a street style fight. I don't know what exactly is going on here, but the vibe seems different, and I'm very excited for what Daniel's gonna do as a director. I know Mark Webb was like, I never, or was it Mark Webb or was it um, who was the Homecoming director?
It
Watts, right?
was John Watts, yeah.
I don't know if it was Watts or if it was Mark Webb, but one of them was like, "Oh, practical swinging is just such a hassle; doesn't really work." And we're seeing Daniel Creston being like, "Yeah, I'm doing plenty of that, right?" And he's trying to make him more of like a spider, not just a kid in a tech suit, right? So I feel like everything about this production, without knowing the plot, at least is trying to get the character to feel more of like that young adult, early college Peter Parker broke. He's in the same literal apartment as McGuire's, I believe, right? So
Mhm.
they're doing a lot of the right things from what I'm seeing on set. So I'm excited about that. I don't think it'll be delayed. And now that we know that it's going to be sequenced, I believe it's sequenced just before Doomsday, right? Like that'll also be very important for it to not be super delayed too, because you need to understand what's going on with Hulk. You need to understand what's going to happen with Yelena. You need to understand what's happening with Spider-Man, if he's even going to have a big role in Doomsday. You can squish them together a little bit because it is technically a Sony release, but you kind of want people to have some breathing room to have time to watch it and then get ready for Doomsday, right? So I don't expect it to move now that we know that like the story is concretely set before Doomsday, and with the characters that are going to appear here, with the rumors of Hulk turning into like a Savage Hulk, or what's the gangster style one, the gray one, I forget his
Oh,
name.
yeah. I forgot his name
Um,
too, but
but yeah,
Peter David's Hulk.
whichever version is not going to be the smart Hulk, right? That's kind of been established for so long now. We're going to get someone that's a little bit more chaotic, more classically Hulk. So yeah, this film needs to come out and has staying power, and it's got to be more of a Deadpool and Wolverine than a Fantastic Four, and it has all the pieces to be so, and while still having a very grounded, more mature take on Peter Parker as a character, on Spider-Man as a character, and what it means to probably be more Spider-Man than Peter Parker most days.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they're going to really go for that. I mean, I think I'm hoping this isn't like just like a stopgap movie. I hope it really does push Spider-Man into the next phase of his life. I mean, we know that we're getting more Spider-Man movies beyond this, right? But with the big Marvel events, you never know how much of this story will pay dividends for Spider-Man's journey versus just coming to a close when they decide to wrap up the whole multiverse thing. And I would be shocked if Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield are not in Doomsday slash Secret Wars, probably more so Secret Wars, but there's rumors about them being on set, or specifically Toby. Um, but they're shooting both of these movies back to back, so you never know what they're shooting, which movie they're shooting. So I don't know. I would be shocked if they're not a part of it. So it'll be interesting to see how Spider-Man's journey here plays into some of the stuff he experienced in and No Way Home, plus whatever he re-experiences with the legacy Spider-Man in Doomsday and Secret Wars, because we won't have another Spider-Man Tom Holland movie until after Secret Wars. So this will be interesting to see how it connects to everything. Because last time we had a Spider-Man movie, we had him appear in Civil War, then we had a Spider-Man movie, then we had a big journey for him in Infinity War. He goes through a lot in Infinity War, and then his movie is more so about the post Endgame Spider-Man than it really is a continuation from Homecoming. There are some plot threads, but it's a lot of how does Spider-Man feel now that Tony's dead, with Far From Home, and then No Way Home is trying to introduce that multiverse aspect to Spider-Man, but it kind of doesn't go necessarily anywhere for the main MCU, because at that time they were still trying to figure out what they were doing with the multiverse stuff. It's more important to like the legacy of Spider-Man. So it'll be interesting to see how much this movie actually pushes forward with whatever's next for Spider-Man versus how much does it push forward and kind of have this kind of singular story for just Peter in this. I mean, talking about Mandalorian and Grogu as well, like I think this will be interesting to see how they touch on a lot of that type of stuff, where like we were just talking about, Grogu leaving in season 2 and then ultimately being back immediately after. Does this movie kind of just do the Spider-Man by himself for one movie, and then after Doomsday and Secret Wars, MJ's back and we've got Zendaya in the movies again, and everybody's back and the whole crew is back together. We'll see if they decide to do like a whole series without them, or if they immediately go back to them after. So yeah, thanks for that question. Next up, where do we go here? I believe it's Critical Thinker who says, how do you think Star Wars can win back its currently dying cultural significance? I feel like you've asked a question about this before, some variation of this. So again, kind of a briefer answer, but it's the same thing I kind of say every time when it comes to Star Wars winning back the fandom or uniting the fandom or all those different words that everybody wants to use. It's all about good product. I mean, we live in a world, again, where every franchise goes through lulls if it's not good. There's the very rare, like, again, Avatar is the unicorn. It really is the weird, rare franchise that doesn't have perfect 10 out of 10 scores for its movies, doesn't have this massive group of following that like goes to conventions dressed up as the Navi and has their own avatar conventions and have its own major line of toys and its own offshoot books and comics, and like it doesn't have any of that other material that usually keeps these franchises alive. But then they can wait, 12 years from the first movie to the second movie, and both of them make over $2 billion. And then you get the third one coming out, right? And so we'll see how the rest of that franchise goes. But that's the unicorn with most of these franchises. Marvel is a good comparison because of the amount of content and similar style that they've done with Star Wars. DC, you can just reference to right now. Like Superman was a pretty beloved movie. Most people who saw it really liked it. Audiences that haven't given Superman specifically a shot or DC Comics a shot in a long time really loved it, but it didn't make even anywhere close to $1 billion because DC as a brand had been kind of tarnished over the last 10 years with the divisiveness between Snyder fans and non-Snyder fans, the mixed reception around critics and fans of those movies. All it takes for Star Wars to be redeemed as a cultural touchstone is purely good product, because there's too many things out there for people to put their interest in than worry about a franchise that they're like, I don't know if this is going to be good or not. I think that confidence that you can believe in something is the number one thing for franchises nowadays. I mean, we again saw it with Marvel. When they were at their peak, Captain Marvel made $1 billion because people thought, hey, I'll trust Marvel without looking at any reviews, without reading anybody's thoughts. I'm going to trust Marvel because I'm so invested in the story. At this point, Star Wars needs that. They need that investment by making good product and creating things and stories that people attach themselves to, because then after that, you still got the parks that are perpetuating the franchise and for mass audiences in Disneyland. You still have the comics, you still have the books for these hardcore audiences, you still have video games for the wider audiences. It's just all about great, consistent mainstream product, and that's what Star Wars needs to get back to. So yeah, that's my kind of simple answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have asked this before. I don't remember exactly what I said last time, but I agree with a lot what Liam's saying. You just have to execute, right? And that's such an easy thing for us to say. Obviously, like no film is guaranteed,
Yeah.
but there are certain things that this new age of theatrical Star Wars seems to destined to at least do a little bit more soundly, right? We're not trying to go back to the era of like every year we have a Star Wars film, right? The idea of a Solo being 6 months after The Last Jedi was ridiculous, right? Even then. And if any of these films has a little bit of divisiveness, has no time to breathe, and you're immediately working on the next marketing campaign, that's a mistake, right? So that's where Disney Plus can still thrive. It can be a nice little stopgap and have more character-centered stories that aren't necessarily galactically changing, right? And that's kind of where it needs to go to. We're seeing that not just with Star Wars, we're seeing that with Marvel, taking things a little bit more into classic TV showrunner style shows again. Obviously, Ahsoka isn't really going to have like a chance to necessarily change that much, but it has a nice little synergy there with Mando and Grogu. If we have a character like Zeb possibly appearing in both of those shows, and having a little bit more of the groundwork being laid up for what seems like just telling the rest of the Mandoverse in movies for the most part. So I think that's smart there. And you still have to take these big swings with Starfighter and all that. I think it's smart for them to not abandon the sequels. Go into it. The problem with the sequels is it's not an era. You can argue about like if it works as a trilogy or not. It worked enough for people to watch 3 of them, but you could see those diminishing returns. And it's because people are like, well, this doesn't feel like it's connected to that. This feels like it flip flops. It feels like it retcons. And then by 9, it just feels like, what are you trying to say? And now you're throwing in Palpatine. Okay, unfortunately, you can't change the actual substance and context of every single film and what's happening in those films themselves, but work around it. Create a full era. Like I said, It's good that they're making Starfighter. It could be a nice one-off, and you can still have Gosling appear in other films that are with other major characters that get introduced, and then allow a lot of these sequel characters to have a second act, to have time as supporting actors or you know cameo characters, and then tie in all this stuff here. Right at the end of the day, more people know about Rey, Poe, and Finn than most other Star Wars characters because they were the biggest characters. They were the big swings that were introduced. And I know we saw something with John Boyega recently saying like I'd have all the original trilogy characters have way more time and all that. Like that's all cool and stuff to say, but then saying I want to take stuff from the Old Republic, The Force Unleashed. The one thing I'll always give credit for the sequels, even if I don't love a lot of the stuff in there, is that they let the young cast shine. They let it be their trilogy, for better or worse. So now we're set up in an era where they're not suddenly like a blank slate. Now we have a chance of taking what worked best for them, evolving them, letting some time be taken off for them from the board. And then when they do reappear, you're bringing the best version. You're being way more careful and considerate about them and what audience expectations are for them. The funny thing about like a lot of filmmaking is like when you bring back characters in a franchise and they aren't super well received the first time, but the second time it's just so well better executed. It almost like a huge upswing in the other direction. People are like, oh my God, like now that stuff that didn't work for so much for me, now I can at least tolerate it. Or, whoa, that stuff actually makes way more sense because the context of this version of the character in this film, right? That's the best thing you can do. And then having a star cast like Starfighter does allows those characters to thrive in that film space and then take whoever makes sense, plug them together with what is old now, like 10 years old now, and you have an era built out. So that's all I'll say to that. Can it win back its dying cultural significance? I mean, every franchise is trying to figure that out right now. Lord of the Rings is trying to figure that out, right? A bunch of franchises like Wheel of Time that seemed like they had a chance of starting have been canceled because of just the changes in streaming. It's not simply just like, oh, things were bad and things were just flooded in the market. Everything has been flooded in the market. Streaming is no longer there. It's a bubble that's been popped. Movies have been dying for 10 years plus. The mid budget has been disappeared for a long time. Every franchise is dealing with this. We can no longer rely on truly IP driven filmmaking anymore in a post COVID world. So the only thing you can do now is just take way more time, space out your movies, and really focus on the execution. You're not going to get that every single time. But if you actually have a little bit more consideration, instead of just saying this is a franchise that needs to be filled up with a movie every single year, yeah, that's not going to happen that way. This feels like a lot more of a change towards a sustainable model while still accepting that you have to still deal with like the consequences of like your biggest property since The Rise of Skywalker being in a Disney Plus show. Now you have to just bring it to the movies and play it out as best as you can and almost film it like a Star Trek movie series and hope for the best for that. And hopefully that lands well. This post sequel era lands well. And then, Star Wars will have its space. It always will. It always has had its ups and downs. People in the 90s reading New Jedi Order in the Bantam era might have loved it, but it was a small fraction of the people who watched the original trilogy. I guarantee you that.
Next is Critical Thinker says, which writers do you think depicted Jaina Solo best? I'd say Alston in Enemy Lines and Fury, as well as Denning in Star by Star and Invincible, though I haven't read Fate of the Jedi, so I don't know how Golden does. Well, I think Denning is, especially with Invincible and Star by Star, but both of those handle the character extremely well. Like Invincible is the ultimate Jaina book. So I would say Denning does a great job with her there. I'd throw in and Kathy Tyers and Balance Point. Jaina does have a good arc there, as well as Edge of Victory with Greg Keyes. I believe it's the second book. She has a lot of stuff with Kip in that, which is really interesting. The way they play off each other, the way he uses her in some moments, and then also kind of her agency away from Rogue Squadron as well in that story is pretty interesting. The other one, and I forgot to name this when you talked about Jason last week, I believe, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago when he asked us about Jason. But Young Jedi Knights is awesome for those characters. It's basically the thing that gave us those characters because they didn't get that much characterization in the other Bantam books. And Jaina, for me, in Young Jedi Knights has always been a little bit more of the standout. She like Jason is a little bit more innocent in some ways. He's more the like he loves his animals and he loves his friends, and he has the Tanel Ka stuff, and he's really great in those books. But Jaina is the one who has a little bit more agency. She's the pilot, she's the mechanic, she does all those types of things. She's often the one kind of saving the day, and kind of like you see with Luke and Leia as well. She's the one that seems a little bit more advanced in handling situations versus Jason and those stories, and they both grow to be awesome throughout the whole thing. But yeah, I really do love the way Kevin J. Anderson and Rebecca Moesta handle Jaina throughout Young Jedi Knights. So underrated when we talk about Legends. So definitely want to give that a shout out as well this time too.
Yeah, Young Jedi Knights, like Liam has mentioned before, it came at a time where there weren't really like these young adult novels, like phase of Star Wars. There's more of those sort of books that felt like slightly more mature than a middle school reader, but they weren't
Yeah.
quite young adult yet. And it's not something that has been replicated or necessarily has that audience anymore. I think a Jedi Quest and a Jedi Apprentice fall closer to like a middle school reader book in comparison to what we saw with Young Jedi Knights, which is pretty interesting to me as a whole. As like, how did that just happen in the 90s? But it did. And like Liam said, that's probably some of her best characterization. All the other Bantam books that she's in, where she's not anything more than a main character, where she's kind of just with her parents and stuff, especially when they're much younger and they're like kidnapped like 3 times and stuff like that. It's just they're not great. New Jedi Order obviously is much better for Jason. I don't love a lot of the stuff with Kip Duran and Jaina New Jedi Order. That stuff really pulls it down for me. I do like her darkness and what she's going through, but it's just like setting them up as like a weird love interest when like Han had kind of treated Kip as like his eldest son at one point. Just didn't really sit that great for me. And I think that's just a nature of like 90s writers in general. They just unfortunately, compared to like some of the more modern writers, didn't necessarily give the female characters the best storytelling. I think once you reach the 2000s, you start seeing a lot stronger storytelling be there. So when we talk about Legacy of the Force, that's where Jaina theoretically should have shined a lot more. I just don't love a lot of her Mandalorian story. I don't love Travis's obsession with Mandalorians, especially when she starts training up Jaina. I'm just like, oh, okay, like, cool. But why is she like now almost like entirely devoid of her Jedi like values and upbringing? Like, it's like she's almost trying to be transformed into a Mandalorian under Travis. And that's where I liked Alston. Alston did a lot better in Fury for me than what they did with Travis. Travis just she at that point she just becomes so obsessed with her own like sub universe of like Mandalorians being the greatest thing ever. Even though in every single story, whether they're neutral, whether they're evil, whether they're good guys, right? They're always defeated by lightsaber users, like by Jedi especially. Like they're strong adversaries, right? They can put up a good fight, right? They can take a couple of battles, but they can't win the whole thing. And it's I just never really liked this idea, especially because the story of Legacy Force jumps between what Travis is writing, what Alston is writing, and what Denning's writing. And I've already mentioned before, I don't really love uh, Denning with female characters. He just does some weird over sexualization at times too. But jumping between those three authors should have been a little bit smoother than like the number of authors there were in New Jedi Order. But I don't know. Just Jaina, I felt like she got shortchanged. And even though Invincible is probably like her best story, a lot of that is still waiting for that final duel. Like it's a lot of sitting around and like just pondering what's gonna eventually happen there, right? And I don't know. The whole Jagged Fell stuff too. Like it's not bad. I actually like them as a duo, but her eventually becoming essentially the first Empress of the Fell Empire, despite her being the sword of the Jedi, that never sat right with me. And I felt like Legacy of the Force never really set anything to like be like, oh well, no, like she probably gave birth, but she was never part of the Empire. Like she like got to be the sort of Jedi and traveled around like a way seeker in like modern canon or something. They had like made some emphasis about that in a different story, which probably sort of the Jedi maybe does if that trilogy had come out. But if at Legacy of the Force had at least been like these two will be together as lovers, but not necessarily together in their empire that Fel has to run, I think we would have left the character in a stronger place. But yeah, I guess Fury. That's really the best one for me. And I still don't love Jaina and Legacy of the Force. I think the whole Mandalorian training arc has its moments, but it's stupid because it's not just her. It's like, Cadus also has these books where like he's like does some incredible feats, and then like he gets beat up the very next book by Mandalorians, and I'm like, I don't I don't see how other than just plot armor for a lot of the stuff there. But I'm just a lot more harsh on Legacy of the Force after just how much better I find New Jedi Order to be for character motivations and arcs, even though it has so many different authors and so many more books.
I think we have time for about one more question. And as for your Ben Solo question, Critical Thinker, I feel like we kind of just did that. Like, so I might move on to your next one. I feel like you asked that question relatively recently. So let's talk about Zero Hour, not just because I love DC. I'll make this one quick, and then we can do one more after that. So thoughts on Zero Hour? Thought it was kind of mediocre and a lesser follow up to Crisis on Infinite Earths. Not terrible, but not great. Yeah, agree completely with you. Except I kind of need to reread it because I think there's some things in concept that are really cool about Zero Hour with Hal in general, right? The Hal Jordan turning evil thing was purely just birthed out of like the 90s obsession with creating events around each character. After Death of Superman worked so well, and after Nightfall worked really well, sales wise for both of them. But Death of Superman is like a genuinely really good story from start to finish. Second half isn't quite as good as the first half, but both are pretty good. Nightfall is fantastic. It's one of my favorite Batman stories in like the pre breaking of the back stuff. After that, the Jean Paul Vallée stuff is super boring to me, and then Batman Coming Back is really good. So that one was a little overlong, but I think overall pretty good. The Hal Jordan turning in the Parallax thing was just felt like they were just doubling down, tripling down on trying to create these big terrible things around every character. But it could have been really cool. And I think Zero Hour. So the reason I said I need to do a reread of it is because I read it in omnibus, and I thought all of the tie-ins were painfully boring. Like they just did not add anything to the main story really at all. So it felt so slow, like such a slog to read through Zero Hour. And so I'd like to go back and just read the main event and see how it works for me a little bit better, because it is kind of it has a big swing at the end that I did appreciate, but overall, with the tie-ins, it was really boring. So yeah, I mean, when you compare it to most DC events, it's one of the worst Crisis, for sure. And I think Infinite Crisis is so much better than it that, especially when you compare it to Crisis on Infinite Earths, like as an actual sequel to Crisis on Infinite Earths, it's not even close to Infinite Crisis. But it does have a few merits in its own right, and ultimately what Johns does with Green Lantern later when he brings back Hal, a lot of that really works, and it doesn't work, I guess, unless you have 0 hours. So I don't know. It's kind of a weird one for me. It's like a 2.5 out of 5 or 3 out of 5 event. Not horrible, but something that's definitely not as good as the other ones. And then we'll go, unless you've read 0 Hour Cynic, I assume you haven't read 0 Hour.
I
We'll
have
move on to
not.
the last
I have
question.
not.
And I think it will be this one, which I believe you've also asked a variation of in the past, but it's been a lot longer since we've answered this question. How do you think the sequel trilogy will be viewed with more time? Do you think there will be a shift in public perception like the prequels, or do you think the reevaluation was an exception rather than the norm? So I think the thing with the sequels that's weird is social media, which yes, we had chat boards and stuff during the prequels, but there was also this kind of wave of nostalgia that took over that made for the reevaluation. Again, there are plenty of people out there who hate the prequels still. There are. Just those people's voice aren't the main voices anymore. Our generation and the like generation within 5 to 10 years of us is the dominant voice in kind of pop culture and YouTube and that type of space right now. So we've kind of created this maybe false perception that the sequels are super beloved now. I do think general audience, because of our generation's love and passion for the prequels, I do think a lot more general audiences who just were going along with the groupthink of a lot of people and said they hated them have given them a reevaluation. I do think that our generation being so obsessed with them has shown them to people who wouldn't normally watch Star Wars, and they've actually fallen in love with it due to the kind of 2000s sensibilities of some of them. but there are older generations who still absolutely hate the prequels. And I think there's still going to be that for the sequels. Now, the weird thing, like I mentioned with social media with the sequels, is how much of the generation that was supposed to grow up loving the sequels is influenced by the constant negativity that they are experiencing on social media. Because I always felt like originally when the sequels were coming out, oh, they'll have their day. Eventually, there will be those people who are prominent in the conversation who were 6 years old when The Force Awakens came out. And now will have their time to talk about how great and how much they love the sequels. And I'm sure there will still be that conversation. It will get better, but I don't know if it will have a full turnaround like the prequels because I do think there's just a general fact around the younger generation nowadays being so influenced by what people like us say on YouTube that they watch they might have enjoyed the movie when they watched it the first time, but they're 8 years old watching a YouTuber say that sucks, so then now they hate it. And I don't know how much of that will end up carrying in throughout their lives or whether they will reevaluate from when they were a child because were they ever allowed to have that nostalgia feeling around something when they were told they weren't supposed to like it immediately. Like when we were younger, I genuinely didn't know people hated the prequels until I was like 13 years old because we didn't have social media and I wasn't on message boards when I was 7, so I didn't know people didn't like these movies and I didn't talk to old school Star Wars fans. I just consumed them, right? And all my friends liked them and I liked them. And then I loved the Clone Wars as a kid. Like all those things just reinforced my love for it. I think the fact that Disney kind of went away from the sequels a little bit, so there hasn't been that reinforcement of the property itself. The fact that social media and influencers and people, a lot of them have conditioned younger generations to say, no, this sucks, rather than say, hey, you enjoy it if you like. I don't know if the sequels will ever really get that full turnaround. And I think the third reason why is because of how much content we get nowadays for Star Wars versus back then. It was like, if you don't like the prequels, then that was the only Star Wars content coming out. So if you were a kid and you were watching it like us, we went from the prequels to Genndy Tartakovsky's Clone Wars to the 3D animated Clone Wars. All of it was in the same era. Like everything Star Wars you could watch that was new was all in the same era. Versus now, you've got stuff that takes place all around the Star Wars world. And you have so much more than we got when we were kids that you can kind of pick and choose what you like most. And so I think there's that inevitability around like pulling people away from the sequel era into other eras that might be more inundated with classic Star Wars feel and vibes because there's content surrounding that and because Disney's kind of abandoned the sequels as a main story. There are going to be generations that grow up with Mandalorian, and then Mandalorian's more closely aligned to the original trilogy and prequel trilogy than it is to the sequels. So like, there's all of that too. So it'll be a really interesting thing to track. I think the sequel perception will get better, but I don't know if it will have the full bounce back like the prequels have had, just purely because of all those other factors.
Yeah, I agree basically with everything that you said here, Liam. Yeah, I had message boards and stuff around like I what was it called? What was that website? It was a place just Jedi forums or whatever it's called. It was a hate board at some point. People were just like how modern social media, they're just like hated the movies, right? And yeah, a lot of it was fair criticism, right? Like that was a thing. Even if you look at like the old message boards for like Lord of the Rings, they hated the changes that were being made at first, but it wasn't flooded into your face from day one, right? Like kids didn't have phones that have thousands of hours of footage within 1 second of you loading up the phone, right? Like stuff like that just wasn't a thing for us. So that makes it harder for sure. It's harder to get people's interest peaked in something a lot more now these days because there's less time for things to sit and settle, right? A lot of movies nowadays can get pulled early, especially in a post-COVID world. So I don't really expect that to be an issue with Star Wars because it's such an established and older franchise. But yeah, it's harder. And there's so much more visual media under Disney that is on our screens, on our TV screens, and our movie screens that you're jumping around so much more often versus like what Liam said. Okay, you watch episode 1, you've played the games around it like Racer and, Starfighter. Okay, great. You're done with
Lego
that.
Star Wars.
Lego Star Wars. Bam. Here we go. Okay, episode 2. Okay, great. Genndy Tartakovsky's Clone Wars was a bridge, literally built as a bridge into episode 3, right? And then, oh wait, Clone Wars kind of destroyed a lot of like the 2003 multimedia project for a lot of people and with some of its inconsistencies. But hey, it was George Lucas making it with Filoni, so people watched that for 5 seasons and a sixth on Netflix and seventh eventually when it kind of gets this little mini reboot here on Disney Plus. So many video games in that era, so many books. The only things that was outside of the era was New Jedi Order and everything after that, because it already started at the same exact time as the prequels had started coming out. Now we have the High Republic happening. We have an Acolyte kind of offshoot happen there, but then we also have Dawn of the Jedi being possibly rumored. Then we have this whole Mandoverse that exploded on accident. The Mandalorian was never meant to be this big. It was meant to be just like a cool little Western gunslinger, right? And then just like, oh snap, this guy's so big, and we want to like immediately undo a lot of the negativity of the sequels. So why wouldn't you? That's a smart business decision. Now they're in the conundrum of like, oh, streaming didn't survive for more than 5 years. Well, we don't want to let go of their best property since the sequel, so now we have to deal with that. So yeah, kids will have that struggle of like, which did you grow up on? Did you grow up on the sequels, or did you really grow up on everything that was original trilogy, prequel adjacent with Mandalorian? And do you have issues with that now too because of how it stumbled halfway through now? And now the storyline feels like it's getting longer, much longer, to get to the point of that New Republic film that Filoni was announced for. So I think that's for the best, but there's that challenge. Like now you can't just abandon that, right? Luckily, we are seeing some sequel revivalism. I think one crucial thing that people are always underplaying about Star Wars is that once they see something they don't like, then they will just be like, "Wow, we're too harsh on this thing." I'm seeing so many people on like Twitter say like, "Wow, all the sauce of the sequels. Wow, they actually trusted their original characters instead of just having legacy characters stick around forever and deep fakes and all." Yeah, that's already happening. To not to the same degree as when it was just the Skywalker saga, but it's happening. Now we have like Path of the Lightsaber, which is gonna be set between episode 8 and 9 as a new original manga, the first since Edge of Balance. We're getting Legacy of Vader, which has been well received. We're getting books like Shadow of the Sith starting to happen. We're getting our first book post episode 9 with the Last Order with Finn and Janna, right? Like a lot of this stuff is starting, right? And now hopefully all that stuff building into Starfighter, building into an era of like just, hey, you don't have to love it, but there's just so much stuff happening in this era now that you can kind of pick and choose different mediums to interact with this. Maybe that'll build a full era that people can be like, okay, I don't love necessarily the start of it, but now it's opened up a huge world that I love a lot of these characters. And when these characters that were the original starters kind of showed up again, I saw how much they grew. I saw some really cool storylines come out of that. I don't think anybody looks at a Kip Duran and Jedi Knight Academy and doesn't see and like project how interesting of an arc he has, despite some of the flaws that he has in New Jedi Order being a horrible, miserable Jedi to deal with. But what he grows through that experiences and grows into Legacy of the Force and everything, like you're like, wow, that's such an interesting look at redeeming a character without just like letting them like just like Vader per se, or like Kylo when he turns back into Ben, where they just die and like that's it. Kip is such an interesting character, but you don't expect that for a kid who just destroyed entire star systems because he was so revenge filled and maybe not pushed and pulled by Exar Kun spirit, right? Same thing can happen here with the sequels. You don't have to love where they were at, but they can kind of grow and blend. And you'd be like, oh, I don't love them when they're 20, but maybe when they're 35, I really loved what they ended up. Right? People didn't love Ahsoka when she first appeared. Now, I think by the time we got to Rebel season 2, she was so beloved. Now she's kind of like, you don't love how she's translating fully to live action, but she is like still genuinely super beloved. Maybe not 95% loving her. Maybe it's kind of slipped more to 80%, but you can do that with these characters. As long as the story is well thought, well executed, things can always improve with Star Wars. So cultural dying significance, that's the thing with every IP right now. That's my biggest argument there. But kids also just have the difficulty of choosing which Star Wars now. And the best thing to do is wrap up Mandoverse as well as you can through movies, build out a sequel, post-sequel era properly with old multimedia, create books and stories for the original trilogy characters and stuff like that that actually bridges those 30 years. And then, we'll be where we are probably at the start of the Del Rey era after Bantam was very up and down for the 90s Star Wars.
Critical thinker also brings up the point of like the MCU specifically with kids growing up in this era, but also I just want to extend it to just so many franchises across the
Yeah.
board, right? Like when Star Wars came out, with the prequels came out in '99, at that point, you didn't really have anything. Like Batman had just basically died from Batman and Robin. You had Superman hadn't had a movie since 1986, so DC in terms of film was kind of dead. Marvel ended up kind of kickstarting the year after with X-Men. Blade was 99, but Blade wasn't, big cultural touchstone like X-Men was. So you started to get franchise, competition, but you didn't have anything that was as big of an event film as Star Wars. I feel like Spider-Man really was the only competition, and that did come out the same year as Attack of the Clones. But outside of that, I can't think of anything else between 99 and 2005 that was that level, like the MCU you're talking about now.
Lord of the Rings, I guess, to a
Yeah, I
degree,
guess Lord of
but
the
it's a
Rings,
different
but
world.
those
Yeah,
those weren't those weren't like those kind of proved themselves to people because they were
yeah.
like for fantasy fans. They ended up becoming huge because of how critically acclaimed they were. But I don't know if like the release specifically of Fellowship was anywhere near what the hype
No.
around Star Wars was at that time.
I
Um,
mean, I guess in that point, then it's really just Harry Potter with the books
yeah,
still
Harry
being
Potter's a good
released, and then the movies being like, "Hey, we just finished this book." The kids are already onto that. That's the only thing comparatively close.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a good one too. Um, but yeah, they were all the prequels. Star Wars was still such a big event, the way it was set up from the 70s and 80s, and the way it was kept alive. That like, and it was a. I think the big thing with Star Wars too was it was a nostalgia base, like family oriented experience versus maybe something you wanted to see your whole life or something specifically targeted towards kids like Lord of the Rings. Diehard fantasy fans would have been really interested in it. um, the Harry Potter younger generation at the time would have been really interested in it. But just as we saw with Force Awakens, and I think that's one of the reasons why Star Wars has remained one of those massive franchises specifically in the United States, is because it's had an effect on almost every generation. It's one of our oldest running franchises. And so you have, like, when Force Awakens came out, my grandparents wanted to go see it and they were in their late 70s, like because they remembered seeing it in 77, and my parents wanted to see it because they were there in 77 and they were also there when the prequels were out, and then I wanted to see it because I was there when the prequels came out. And then so it just is a generational thing. Star Wars has, because the MCU's run so long and because some of these other franchises have run so long, it doesn't quite claim that specific point alone anymore, right? Like the MCU's been going on for nearly 20 years. So if you were born in 2005 and you were 3 and saw Iron Man for some reason, you're 23 in 2028. So you, or 2025, this year you'd be 20, yeah, 20 years old. You'd be 23 in 2028 when Iron Man, would be 20 years old, right? So like you there's a longevity and a multi-generational facet to more franchises now, which is definitely a barrier for certain things like the sequels. But I do think the sequels were widely seen enough. I mean, again, all three of them made $1 billion. One of them's the highest grossing movie domestically of all time, and probably will never get topped, at least not until inflation is extremely inflated from where it is now. Like it'll be one of those things that's a record for 20 years because it made so much in the United States. And so I think because the sequels are so widely seen, they still have that shot of having that redemption. It's just, again, I think it's all the other factors around social media and the franchise and the gluttony of Star Wars content we have now versus what we had in the 2000s that will make this. I think also home video not being as big is another big one. Like, because I mean, wore out our DVDs of Revenge of the Sith and Attack of the Clones and all that stuff when we were kids, because that was the way to watch Star Wars. Now you can turn on an episode of the Clone Wars you liked, on streaming. Now you can turn on an episode of Rebels you liked when you're eating dinner. Now you can turn on 20 minutes of Attack of the Clones if you want to watch the arena battle. You don't have to watch the whole movie start to finish like we kind of did when we were younger. So I think there's that kind of disconnect in terms of passion as well. There's a lot of interesting societal things to look at with the 2010s when it comes to the advent and rise of streaming and rise of franchise filmmaking and all of that. That will be interesting to track as we see where the sequels go. But yeah, that's our stream tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Again, thank you for your support. As always, thank you for your chats. We appreciate it. We love talking with you all. So thanks for joining us tonight. Make sure you check out our reaction to the Mandalorian trailer. You get to see us watch it for the first time and analyze it for the first time. So make sure you check it out. We did just post it yesterday. Have continued content coming out throughout the week, including shorts 3 days a week, polls twice a day, every day. Make sure you like the video if you haven't. Comment below if you are new, and subscribe as well. If you're new, make sure you join us every single week, 7 p.m. Pacific time. And we will take your guys' questions, comments, theories, anything you'd like to discuss every single week. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and we will see you